Everyone thought my marriage was solid. That's what made the silence inside it so dangerous. From the outside, our life looked stable, almost boring in the way people secretly envy. A small house on a quiet street. A routine that never changed. Me leaving early every morning, her coming home before sunset. Bills paid on time. No shouting. No scenes. If someone had asked, I would have said we were fine. That was the word I used most often back then. Fine. I was never a loud man. I worked long hours, kept my head down, and believed consistency mattered more than charm. I didn't drink much, didn't flirt, didn't disappear for nights at a time. I thought that made me reliable. I thought reliability was love in its purest form. My wife used to think so too. Or at least she pretended to. Somewhere along the way, her patience thinned. It wasn't obvious at first. It came out in sighs when I talked too long about work. In the way her eyes drifted to her phone when I spoke about plans. In comparison, she didn't even try to hide friends' husbands, men from social media, strangers who seemed to live louder, brighter lives than I did. Mark just bought a new car, she'd say casually, scrolling. Emily's husband took her to Paris again. She never said, "Why can't you be like them?" but the silence after her words said it for her. We stopped asking each other real questions. Conversations turned functional: groceries, schedules, reminders. At night, we lay inches apart, backs facing each other, sharing a bed without sharing thoughts. I could feel her restlessness in the way she moved, like she was already somewhere else. Still, I told myself this was normal. Marriages aged. Passion faded. Stability replaced excitement. That was the story I clung to. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I was preparing for something. Not money. Not success. Just a decision I had been quietly shaping for years. I was learning, planning, setting pieces in place with no promise they'd ever matter. It wasn't a secret meant to impress. It was intention. A direction. Something only I believed in. She never asked? One evening, I came home later than usual. The house was quiet, lights dim. She sat on the couch, phone in hand, smiling at the screen. Not the polite smile she gave me, but something softer. Warmer. When she noticed me, the smile vanished instantly. "You're late," she said, irritation first, concern nowhere to be found. I apologized out of habit. She nodded, already looking back at her phone. As I walked past, I caught a glimpse of the screen before it went dark. A name I didn't recognize. A message cut off mid-sentence. Nothing damning. Nothing clear. But something felt wrong. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while she slept beside me, her breathing calm, distant. I realized that for the first time, I didn't feel married. I felt tolerated. Like a placeholder in a life she hadn't decided to leave, yet. It was a small moment. Easy to ignore. I didn't know then that it was the beginning. The change didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like mold behind a wall, hidden, patient, undeniable once discovered. At first, it was her phone. She never used to guard it. It lay on tables, countertops, forgotten on the couch. Now it never left her hand. She tilted the screen away when I entered the room. Took calls on the balcony. Smiled without explanation, then locked her face the moment she noticed me watching. I told myself I was imagining it. Suspicion felt like a betrayal of its own. I didn't want to become that man, the paranoid husband counting seconds, inventing crimes where there were none. Love, I believed, required trust even when it felt uncomfortable. One night, I woke to the sound of her voice. It was low. Soft. Careful. I didn't open my eyes. I lay still, listening, my heart beating faster with each word I wasn't supposed to hear. She stood near the window, back turned to the bed, whispering into her phone like the walls themselves were listening. "I miss you too," she said. A pause. "No, not here. I can't talk like that." My chest tightened. My mind raced for excuses. Asterisk a friend, a coworker, someone harmless star. But there was something in her tone I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Tenderness. Attention. When she noticed I'd shifted, she ended the call instantly and slipped back into bed without a word. I pretended to sleep. She pretended nothing had happened. The next day, I found a message notification while her phone charged on the kitchen counter. I wasn't looking for it. It lit up on its own. Last night meant more than you think. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Her laughter sounded louder, almost forced. She dressed with more care. Perfume she hadn't worn in years lingered in the air after she left. I moved through the hours like someone underwater, aware of everything yet detached from it all. That evening, I asked her, carefully, calmly, if there was something she wanted to tell me. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, as if tired of carrying a burden that had nothing to do with guilt. I didn't plan this, she said. It just happened. She told me she felt invisible. That she had been lonely for years. That someone finally saw her. Listened. Made her feel alive again. I deserve that, she added quietly. I deserve more than just existing. I wanted to argue. To remind her of everything I'd given, everything I was still building. But the words stayed trapped inside me. Denial battled truth in my chest, and truth was winning too fast. What about us? I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was distant, already somewhere else. I don't know, she said. I don't think I can keep pretending anymore. That night, she didn't turn her back to me. She turned away from the marriage itself. And I understood, with a clarity that hurt more than anger ever could, that something in her had already left, and it wasn't coming back. Equals. The confrontation didn't explode the way I once imagined it would. There were no flying words, no broken plates. Just a slow, deliberate dismantling of everything we had left. It happened on a Sunday morning. Gray light filtered through the curtains. The house was too quiet for a place that still held two people pretending to be married. She sat at the kitchen table, already dressed, coat folded neatly over the chair beside her. That alone told me this wasn't a conversation, it was a conclusion. We need to talk, she said. I nodded and sat across from her. My hands rested on the table, steady. I remember noticing a small stain near the edge of the wood, and wondering how long it had been there. My mind clung to details like they could protect me from what was coming. She didn't ease into it. I can't do this anymore. I waited. Part of me still believed there would be a way back if I said the right thing. If I listened hard enough. She looked at me then, not with anger, not even sadness, but with something closer to disappointment. I regret marrying you, she said. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation. No apology. She told me I was safe but uninspiring. That I hid behind routine because I was afraid to want more. That while other men took risks, chased opportunities, built lives that meant something, I stayed invisible, comfortable being average. You don't fight for anything, she said. Not even yourself. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That everything I did was for stability, for the future, for us. That not every man needed to be loud to be strong. But every explanation sounded like weakness even in my own head. She leaned back, crossing her arms. I feel like I wasted years waiting for you to become someone else. Then she said the word that ended it. I'm filing for divorce. Not we should. Not maybe. She had already decided. I was being informed. I asked her if there was someone else. She didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. This isn't about him, she said. It's about me choosing myself. The conversation drifted after that, but the damage was done. Papers were mentioned. Logistics. Time frames. She spoke like someone planning a move, not dismantling a marriage. When she stood to leave, I followed her to the door. The coat slipped over her shoulders effortlessly, like she'd been rehearsing this exit for weeks. She paused with her hand on the handle, not looking at me. I hope you figure out what you want someday, she said. But I can't wait for you anymore. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold air. I stood there as it closed behind her, the sound sharp and final. No tears came. Just a hollow stillness that settled into the house, into me. In that moment, stripped of dignity and choice, I understood something I hadn't before. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because she never respected me at all. The days after she left blurred together, indistinct and heavy. The house felt larger without her, every room echoing with absence. I moved through it like a guest who had overstayed his welcome, careful not to disturb memories that no longer belonged to me. Bills arrived faster than I expected. Legal fees. Temporary support. Costs I had never planned for because I never planned for failure. Her lawyer spoke efficiently, confidently, as if the outcome were already written. In his voice, I heard her version of the story repeated, quietly unsuccessful, emotionally absent, a man she had outgrown. No one asked how long I had been carrying the weight alone. Friends chose sides without discussion. Some stopped calling entirely. Others offered sympathy that felt rehearsed, shallow. She just needed more, one of them said, as if that explained everything. You're a good guy. Another added, the phrase people use when they mean not enough. Even my own family struggled to hide their disappointment. They didn't blame me outright, but the questions cut deep. Why didn't you see it sooner? Why didn't you try harder? As if effort had a visible measurement. As if love could be audited. The worst part came when the house fell quiet on weekends. She took our child with her most days. The rooms that once held laughter now held nothing but dust and unused toys. I learned how loud silence could be when it followed the sound of a door closing behind someone you loved more than yourself. Video calls replaced bedtime routines. Short visits replaced presence. I smiled through them, pretending this version of fatherhood was enough. At night, doubt pressed in from all sides. I replayed every sacrifice, every choice to be patient instead of ambitious, stable instead of bold. I asked myself if she was right, if I had mistaken fear for responsibility, caution for character. Maybe being dependable was just another word for being forgettable. There were moments when anger surfaced, sharp and tempting. I imagined proving her wrong. Imagined watching regret bloom on her face. But those thoughts faded quickly, leaving exhaustion behind. Revenge required energy I didn't have. One evening, after another call that ended too soon, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same place where she had ended everything. The stain on the wood was still there. I traced it with my finger, thinking about how time passed whether you moved forward or not. For the first time since she left, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I had lost. Not just my marriage, but the version of myself that believed endurance was enough. Yet beneath the weight, something steadied. A quiet understanding formed, fragile but real. I couldn't rewrite the past. I couldn't control how others saw me. But I could choose what came next. Not revenge. Not desperation. Just resolve. I stood up, turned off the lights, and went to bed, not hopeful, not healed, but no longer waiting for someone else to define my worth. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, slipped between utility bills and legal notices like it didn't understand the weight it carried. I almost didn't open it. For months, every envelope had meant loss, money leaving, decisions made without me, confirmations of things already broken. This one was different. It was from a firm I barely remembered contacting years ago, back when my life still felt like something I was building instead of defending. Back when my nights were spent studying, planning, investing small amounts I couldn't afford to lose. I never spoke about it. Not because it was secret, but because it wasn't impressive yet. Potential doesn't earn respect, results do. The letter was brief. Clinical. Precise. An acquisition had gone through. Shares had matured. What I had started quietly, patiently, almost obsessively, had finally reached its conclusion. The number at the bottom didn't feel real. The irony hit me slowly. Not like shock, like weight. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't luck. It was the result of years of discipline she had never noticed, never asked about, never believed in. And it had arrived only after the divorce papers were signed, after the house was empty, after the narrative of my failure had been finalized. I sat there for a long time, the letter resting unopened on the table, my hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee. There was no rush of joy. No urge to call anyone. No instinct to prove anything. Just silence. I thought about telling her. About the look on her face if she knew what she'd walked away from. About how easily the story would flip, how fast sympathy would turn into regret. The thought came uninvited, sharp and tempting. Then it passed. Revenge would have required her attention. And I realized I no longer wanted it. I didn't change my routine. I went to work the next day. Paid the same bills. Sat in the same quiet rooms. The money stayed where it was, untouched, unnamed. I told no one. Not my family. Not my friends. Privacy felt like control in a life that had lacked it for too long. At night, instead of replaying arguments, I reflected on how close I'd come to abandoning myself just to be chosen. On how easily value was mistaken for visibility. On how the work that mattered most was often invisible until it was finished. This wasn't a victory. It was an opening. Months passed. Then years. The legal battles ended. The shame softened. My child grew. And somewhere between routines and restraint, between patience and purpose, a different version of me began to take shape, quietly, deliberately. 5 years went by. And the past, which once defined everything, finally started moving toward me instead. 5 years passed without ceremony. No dramatic milestones. No public reinvention. Just time, applied consistently. My life became quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. I moved to a smaller place closer to my work, not because I needed to, but because it made sense. Mornings began early. Exercise, reading, structured hours. Discipline replaced distraction. I learned the difference between movement and progress. The money existed in the background, steady and untouched by impulse. It worked while I didn't think about it. I lived well, but plainly. No symbols. No statements. Comfort without display felt like a private language I spoke only to myself. What changed most wasn't my environment, it was my posture toward the world. I stopped waiting for validation. Stopped measuring myself against expectations that had never been mine. I listened more. Spoke less. When I made decisions, I made them once and stood by them. My relationship with my child deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Time together became deliberate. Present. I didn't compensate with gifts or promises. I showed up. Every visit, every call, every ordinary moment. That consistency rebuilt something I thought I had lost permanently. Occasionally, pieces of the past surfaced. Not directly. Never from her. Mutual acquaintances mentioned changes in passing. A job that hadn't lasted. A move that didn't work out. Someone said she was going through a hard time. The way people soften reality when it's no longer polite to admire it. Another hinted that the man she left with hadn't stayed. That stability, once dismissed as dull, had become rare. I didn't ask questions. The details weren't mine to collect. What surprised me most was the absence of satisfaction. There was no quiet triumph in hearing she struggled. Just distance. Like learning about weather in a city you no longer lived in. One evening, after a long day, I found a message waiting. An unfamiliar number. The words were cautious. Formal. Asterisk, it's been a long time. I don't know if you'd be willing, but I was hoping we could talk. Just once, asterisk. I read it twice. Then set the phone down. An hour passed. Then another. I watched the city lights outside my window settle into their patterns, unchanged by anything that had once felt world-ending. I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't eager. I was in control. When I finally picked the phone up again, there was a second message. I don't expect anything. I just need to see you. The past had found its way back, not with force, not with drama, but with need. And for the first time since she left, the choice of whether to open that door belonged entirely to me. I agreed to meet her on a weekday afternoon, choosing a quiet cafe near my office. Neutral ground. No memories attached. I arrived early, not out of anticipation but habit. I sat by the window, ordered coffee, and waited without checking my phone. When she walked in, I didn't recognize her immediately. She looked smaller somehow. Thinner. The confidence she once carried so easily no longer announced itself. Her clothes were neat but worn, chosen for practicality rather than impression. She scanned the room twice before her eyes settled on me, and even then, hesitation flickered across her face, as if she were unsure. It took a moment for recognition to land. "Oh," she said softly. You look different." I nodded. Not smiling. Not cold. Just present. She sat down across from me, carefully, like someone unsure of the weight a chair might hold. Her hands rested in her lap. No phone. No distractions. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. "You look well," she added finally. "So do you," I replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She exhaled, a long breath she seemed to have been holding for years. "I didn't know how to start," she said. "I've replayed this 100 times." I said nothing. Silence had become a skill. She told me pieces of her life without chronology, jobs that didn't last, moves that felt necessary at the time, choices framed as survival. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. The shape of the story was familiar, chasing momentum, mistaking urgency for direction. "I thought I was doing the brave thing," she said. "I thought leaving meant choosing myself." Her eyes met mine, searching for something. Approval. Understanding. Maybe absolution. "I was wrong," she continued quickly, as if afraid I might interrupt. "It wasn't you. It was everything happening at once. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know who I was anymore." I noticed how often she spoke in passive language. Things happened. Circumstances changed. Responsibility hovered at the edges but never quite stepped into the room. "You were always so calm," she said. "So steady. At the time, it felt like indifference. I thought you didn't care enough to fight." "I did fight," I said evenly. "Just not loudly." She flinched, not at the words, but at their certainty. "I see that now," she said. "I didn't understand what I had." She paused, then asked, "Are you still living in the same place?" "No." "What do you do now?" The questions came casually, but her posture shifted. Curiosity sharpened. The old instinct to measure resurfaced, faint but familiar. "I work," I said. "I live well." She nodded, as if that confirmed what she'd already assumed. "I'm glad," she said. "Really. I always hoped you'd be okay." There it was. The assumption that okay was the ceiling. The waiter arrived with the check. I reached for it without comment. She noticed my watch as my sleeve pulled back, nothing flashy, just precise. Her gaze lingered a second too long. "You've done well," she said slowly. "Yes," I replied. Something shifted in her expression. Calculation gave way to realization, then disbelief. "You mean, really well?" I met her eyes. No pride. No satisfaction. "Yes." The truth settled between us, heavy and irreversible. For the first time since she sat down, she was truly silent. Equals 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 equals. The silence stretched longer than either of us expected. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind that forces honesty to surface because there's nowhere left for it to hide. She was the first to speak. "I didn't know," she said quietly. About any of it. I know, I replied. You never asked? Her eyes dropped to the table. For the first time since we sat down, she looked uncomfortable, not because of what I'd become, but because of what she'd chosen to leave behind. I heard you, she said. It wasn't a question. I see that now. I nodded once. You didn't just hurt me, I said. You erased me. You decided who I was without letting me speak. She swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her cup. At the time, I felt like I was drowning, she said. Everything felt small. Predictable. I thought if I stayed, I'd disappear. You disappeared anyway, I said calmly. Just somewhere else. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Truth didn't require force. She looked up then, eyes glassy but steady. I was unfaithful, she said. Before I left. Emotionally at first. Then more. I told myself it didn't count because I was already gone in my head. I didn't react. I had lived with that knowledge long enough for it to lose its power. I know, I said. What mattered wasn't the act. It was the choice. You chose escape over honesty. Her shoulders slumped, like something had finally been named correctly. I justified it, she said. I told myself I deserved happiness. That you were holding me back. That loving you meant shrinking myself. And did leaving make you bigger? I asked. She didn't answer right away. No, she admitted. It made me alone. The confession lingered between us, raw and unprotected. I waited for you, I continued. Not physically. Internally. For a long time, I thought if I changed enough, you'd see me differently. When you left, that illusion died. She looked at me, searching. And what happened after? I rebuilt, I said. Not to replace you. To survive losing you. I told her about the nights I questioned my worth. The quiet routines that saved me. The discipline that replaced desperation. I didn't mention money. It wasn't the point. You leaving forced me to meet myself, I said. And I learned something important. What? She asked. That love without respect isn't love. It's endurance. Her breath caught. I'm sorry, she said. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, I agreed. It doesn't. She hesitated, then spoke the words she'd clearly rehearsed. I don't expect us to go back to what we were, she said. But I've changed. I know I have. If there's any chance at all, to try again, I'd take it. The question finally arrived, heavy with hope and fear. I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness was simple. I had already begun that process, for myself, not for her. Reconciliation was something else entirely. It required trust rebuilt from nothing. It required believing that absence had taught her what presence never did. I looked at her, truly looked, and realized this was the moment everything balanced on. Not on love. On choice. And whatever I said next would define not just our past, but my future. I didn't answer her right away. Not because I was unsure, but because some truths deserved to be spoken carefully. When I finally did, my voice was steady. I forgive you. Her face softened instantly, hope rising before she could stop it. But I'm not coming back. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet complete. She straightened, as if bracing for impact, the fragile optimism draining from her eyes. I need you to understand the difference, I continued. Forgiveness is about releasing what poisoned me. Reunion would mean reopening a door I closed for a reason. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I let the silence do its work. You didn't just leave a marriage, I said. You rewrote who I was while I was still standing next to you. You decided I was weak so you wouldn't have to face your own restlessness. Tears welled, but she didn't interrupt. I've rebuilt myself without you, I went on. Not to punish you. Not to prove anything. But because I had to. The man sitting in front of you exists because you're not beside him. She looked down, nodding slowly. I know I don't get to ask for anything, she said. I just hoped. I know, I said. And I don't blame you for hoping. That was the truth. Bitterness would have been easier, but it would have been dishonest. She wasn't a villain. She was someone who chose escape over growth, and paid for it. I wish you well, I added. Genuinely. I hope you find peace. But it won't be with me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, composed herself with visible effort. I never meant to break you, she said. I wasn't broken, I replied gently. I was unfinished. We stood at the same time. There was no dramatic pause. No last touch. Just two people acknowledging the end of something that no longer needed to be carried forward. At the door, she turned once more. You've become someone I would have fallen in love with, she said quietly. I met her eyes. I was always this person, I said. You just couldn't see him yet. She nodded, accepting. Then she walked away. Not defeated. Not angry. Changed. And for the first time, her leaving didn't take anything from me. Equals 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 equals. The apartment was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that carries memory without demanding attention. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blink in familiar patterns, and let the past settle around me like dust, present but harmless. Not gone, but no longer dangerous. I thought about love. About what it means to give yourself fully and still be overlooked. About betrayal, and how it shapes you far more than it ever destroys you. I understood now that pain wasn't proof of weakness. It was a measure of depth. Of capacity. I had endured what many could not, and in that endurance, I found clarity. I thought about my child. The small person who had grown up watching absence and presence in equal measure. I was determined that my child would learn something I had only discovered through loss: the value of integrity, of steady care, of showing up when it matters most. I had money now, yes, but the real inheritance I could leave wasn't material. It was character. It was the example that loyalty, to oneself, to others, to truth, was far more powerful than wealth. I recalled the evenings spent sitting at the kitchen table alone, wrestling with doubt, shame, and longing. I remembered nights imagining a life where anger or revenge could have dictated my choices, and how easy it would have been to let bitterness define me. Yet here I was, years later, calm and grounded. My wealth existed quietly in accounts and investments, but it had no power over my peace. What mattered had always been invisible to the world, and invisible to her: the discipline, the self-respect, the refusal to let someone else's choices erase my sense of worth. I thought about her. About her departure, her return, her realization. She had been humbled, reshaped by consequences she could not control. She had asked for forgiveness, asked for a second chance, but I had given her only the truth. She left changed, and that was enough. There was no triumph in that, no satisfaction in watching her learn what I had already learned myself. It was simply life settling into its proper order, a balance restored. And I thought about myself. The man I had been when she left. The man I had become because of her absence. There was no dramatic transformation, no overnight metamorphosis. Only steady growth. Only the patient accumulation of knowledge, habit, and self-respect. I had built a life on foundations she could not see, yet they held me better than any wealth, any approval, any fleeting passion ever could. The lesson was clear, though it took years to articulate fully: love is not enough without loyalty. Success is hollow without character. And true wealth is measured not in money, but in the life you can build quietly, patiently, in the spaces between loss and gain. I looked at my child, sleeping peacefully in the next room, and smiled without needing to explain why. The world outside would judge, speculate, envy, or pity. I did not need it. I had lived. I had endured. I had learned. And in that learning, I had discovered the one thing no betrayal could take from me: myself. I rose from the window, letting the evening settle over the city like a blanket. I turned off the lights and walked quietly to the bedroom, feeling the weight of the years behind me and the calm of the future ahead. Nothing more was owed. Nothing more was necessary. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized that what remained, steadfast, silent, and unshakable, was enough. The world could change. People could leave. Fortune could rise or fall. But the measure of a man, the measure of a life, remained. And mine had finally been found.